Okay, in this lecture, we're going to talk about a poet named Wilfred Owen and his poem Dulce Decorum Est. And the theme or genre in which Wilfred Owen is writing, he sort of writes about his experience of World War I, and he can be sort of situated as one of the many English poets who were also soldiers and wrote about their experience of war, and particularly a kind of disillusionment with some of the realities of war. So when I say disillusionment, I mean there was sort of this culture or idea that war was something that gave young men a chance to prove themselves, and it was going to be a rewarding experience that they could be proud of and that they'd feel, great pride in when they came home, that they had done something great. But that's not the reality for a lot of these soldiers who just felt completely, almost like they were victimized by a more cruel military system. And Wilfred Owen became friends with another poet, Siegfried Sassoon, when they met at Craiglockhart Hospital. And both men at the time were being sort of treated for shell shock. So if you know anything about the history of shell shock, that this is sort of probably the closest that we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. So especially for soldiers who were diagnosed with shell shock, that would be most closely related to symptoms we associate with post-traumatic stress disorder. So these were soldiers who had experienced traumatic events and were having a difficult time dealing with it, often suffering from nightmares, recurring tremors, fears, anxieties related to their experience. And this was generation of young men who had to experience the suffering of the First World War and were treated often for shell shock symptoms. And many of the soldiers became, I won't say pacifists, but they started opposing or becoming more anti-war as it went on, because they saw sort of the exploitation of the soldiers themselves, and they no longer believed in the point of the war, and they felt really kind of that it was a cruel, unjust experience for generations of young men whose lives were lost for capital gains or political power. So it was sort of all for nothing. They were dying for no other reason except for maybe a little bit of territory or money or political maneuvers by governments. Wilfred Owen ended up dying in action in 1918. But before that, he wrote this poem that really conveys a realistic portrayal of war and one of the most sort of brutally evocative description of war in his imagery. And it gives you a sense when you're reading it of the traumatic situation that these young men were faced with, and how even after events like the war was over, that the symptoms of post-traumatic stress or shell shock would be evident in many of these soldiers. So let's look at this poem more closely. Okay, so I'm just going to read it in stanzas and we'll kind of unpack it as we go. So stanza number 1, bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched to sleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, blood-shod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue. deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Okay, so a lot of imagery here. We have a description of the soldiers sort of trudging through mud and sludge back to their distant resting place. So this could be the camp where, or the dugout where they will spend the night, having just returned from being on the front lines. So when that little tour is done, when you're in the front lines for, I don't know, however many days or hours, you're allowed to go back to your dugout and rest. So that's what these men are doing. And the description, so bent double like old beggars under sacks. We have a simile there, describing the soldiers as if they were, beggars under sacks. Maybe description of their very heavy backpacks. Knock-kneed, coughing like hags. So this is not a depiction of a soldier as very strong and tough. This is a very human portrayal of soldiers, very weakened and exhausted and sickly, and just, they're barely awake at this point. They're just going through the motions, trying to get back to their resting place. And in the background, we have haunting flares that they have their backs turned towards. So in the background, there's flares going off. It could be artillery shells being dropped, or it could maybe just be the flares that are lit up so they can find their way back at nighttime. And it's a lot of heaviness and exhaustion that seems to be conveyed here. You do have a rhyme scheme too, if you noticed. So sacks, backs, trudge, sludge. There is a rhyme scheme to this poem. And then men marched to sleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, blood shod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. So again, the second part of that is, they're not literally asleep while they're marching, but it's almost, they're so exhausted that they're almost just doing it out of pure kind of inertia, right? They're just going through the motions of movement, and even some have lost their boots, but they limped on, and you can imagine feet maybe bloody, blistered. All went lame, so there was not one man without some kind of injury. Blind does have many connotations as well, all blind. So I don't know if this is literal blindness, maybe from like a gas attack, or there's a lot of toxic chemicals in the air, or sort of just the fog of warfare around. It could maybe be blindness, a metaphorical blindness too. So you could unpack that line a little bit. Drunk with fatigue. So yeah, so tired that it's almost like you're drunk. I don't know if any of us have ever experienced that, but you kind of do get a little delirious when you're so exhausted, as if you were, no longer sort of thinking rationally. And deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. So all of their senses are kind of diminished, even their sense of hearing, right? There's gas shells dropping behind them, and they can't even hear them. They're deaf to that because you get used to the noise and the chaos all around you. Okay, so very descriptive language, a lot of imagery here, and literary devices like metaphor and similes, as well as a standard or a conventional rhyme scheme. And then second stanza, gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in lime or fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. So something happens. They're all walking back, trudging along back to their resting spot for the night. And then there's this occurrence, a gas attack. So that's why they have to sort of clumsily fit on their gas masks, their helmets, just in time before the gas hits them. And the word ecstasy of fumbling is kind of interesting. I don't quite know what to make of the word ecstasy, except for I think it does translate into a kind of outer body experience, maybe. Like it's almost like a fantasy, like they were dreaming. It's not quite reality. Um, and it's a clumsy action, right? They're fumbling, bumbling, clumsily putting their stumbling, right? So it's not the sort of the imagine how we imagine a soldier, very skilled and deft at every movement. This is, a lot of clumsy action from a lot of very tired, you know, exhausted men who are at the brink of, they just want to get back to safety, right? So it's a very human portrayal of soldiers, not idealized or not glorified or glamorized. And it comes across very realistic in the description. And then in this chaos of this gas attack, one of the men can't quite find his mask, or he doesn't put it on in time, and then he ends up floundering like a man in fire or lime. So his body is reacting to the gas, uh, suffering uh, heavily through the gas attack. And then dim through the misty panes and thick green light as under a green sea. So we have a lot of green imagery here, color of green, a green sea, green light, thick. So the gas, I think, is being described here as this green sea that literally kind of envelops or encases this man, and he's drowning in the air, right, in this gas attack. And our speaker here, I, lets you know that this is a witness, right? He has seen this. This is what happened. It's something that he's saw firsthand. And then second part here. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. So I think this is really important, actually, because the line "in all my dreams" suggests that this is an event that has played out time and time again in his memory, right? It's more like a nightmare, not a dream, but it's something that he's continually thought about long after this event was over. So all his dreams seem to go back to this traumatic memory of this man dying in this gas attack and witnessing his death. So this is an indication of kind of post-traumatic stress disorder or shell shock, right? Where you have a soldier who is stuck in a very traumatic moment, and all of his memories and thoughts go back to this feeling of helplessness and this horrifying experience of being caught in a surprise gas attack and then having one's fellow soldier, a comrade, die in a very gruesome way. So this man drowning in the gas attack, guttering, choking, plunges at me in all my dreams. So he's clearly haunted by this memory of this man's death. And then our speaker kind of proposes in the last stanza. So if in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce decorum est pro patria more. So our speaker is saying, if you too could experience what I experienced, or if you could see what I saw, namely this person's death by a gas attack, then you would not tell with such enthusiasm to children this old lie. And we have to know what this lie is. So it explains here in the note that this Latin phrase is from the Roman poet Horace, meaning it is sweet and fitting to die to one's country or for one's country. So Horace, the Roman poet who is being quoted here, wrote his ode, and it was a very patriotic poem that said that it was sweet and honorable for soldiers to die because in death they would go to heaven. So it was, honorable men would serve their country, happily serve their country and die as soldiers. But Wilfred Owen says that that's a lie, that it's not sweet. There's nothing sweeter or, fulfilling about this experience of war. It's just suffering and innocent lives being destroyed, basically. So he's saying that patriotism is really a lie, and that there is really no like that war is not a justified reason to sacrifice the young lives of young men and women who serve the country. So he sort of is criticizing a lot of the enthusiasm for war and the patriotism behind it, and saying, if you were me and you saw what I saw, you would not believe that it's sweet and honorable to die for one's country, or that sacrifice is worth it. And the description of this person dying is his evidence that is not true. And then the haunting dreams, the smothering dreams that continually haunt him long after the event is over, is another indication that, even those individuals who survived, in some ways, they're still struggling with the reality, the traumatic effects of what they saw or did during the war. And the description here is all very, there's a lot of sensual or sense imagery, or he talks about what he heard. He paints a very vivid picture. Everything is sort of very descriptive. So he's trying to really convey to the reader some realities of war that go beyond just this kind of glorified or glamorized image that exists of war as something beautiful or something noble or something sweet and fitting that people voluntarily do to serve their country. But he's sort of saying that it's not worth it. It's not worth the lives lost to serve one's country just for patriotism. So this is a very strong critique, a very anti-war poem. Even though Wilfred Owen was a soldier himself, he becomes a kind of very strong opposition to patriotism and that kind of warmongering or bloodlust that's associated with war. And he's sort of telling us the reality is a lot more difficult for those who survive and to watch and witness the lives of young innocent men be taken in such brutal ways. So very strong indictment against war in Wilfred Owen's Dulce Decorum Est.